Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that is common to many of us who have been in this about dependency mapping and how, at various levels, when you have big teams, what happens, right? So today we have with us Joseph Cohen, who's an Agile coach, a lead, and someone I know for a while, an expert in this space, and he's going to talk to us about dependency management and how all of that works together. So welcome, Joseph, and I'll hand it over to you for this.
My name is Joseph Cohen. I live in Dallas, Texas, where I live with my spouse, Rebecca, and our two dogs, Waldo and Winnie, who you can see in the picture. In a professional capacity, I've worn many hats, always with a focus on delivery and execution, and always having a lens on optimization. So one of the things that I've learned along this journey is that every company and every industry is different. And my focus is really to optimize teams and delivery within those organizations, specifically acknowledging what we can and can't change. So going to the next slide, these are just some organizations that I've worked at. You could say that I stumbled into agility and transformation work. It started really at Capital One, and since that time, I've worked at other organizations to help mature engineering and product practices and teams. I followed a non-traditional path. I was actually a BA, and I moved into a Scrum Master role. And typically, your BAs become your product owners, your product managers in this model. But I just went the other path, and I think it's one of the things that I think sets me apart, just because I do have that analytical view. I'm always looking at ways to really improve and make things better. You'll see from my certifications, I do have a SAFe certification that I don't have listed here. And most of my certifications will lean technical. And that really is just coming from a place where, I have a belief that I need to be able to speak to my teams. That means understanding what they're doing, understanding what challenges they're facing. That doesn't mean sitting down and writing the code. I guarantee you it's not going to look pretty if I do it. But looking at it and at a very high level, understanding what it's doing, right? And so if you can do that, then you're able to really advocate for those teams and speak to the challenges that they're facing, or even challenges in terms of a workflow. If you're trying to release and there's something holding you up, you can speak to that. So that's a little bit about me. And then I'm going to start with some vague open questions. We're going to talk about some emerging trends in the industry, some history, various types of organizational structures, and finish off with how one possible example of how you might structure tooling using dependency management, and to help address some of the shortcomings that come with those organizational structures. All of it's high level, but you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn, and happy to dig a little deeper into your specific issues. Primarily, they're all iterative, collaborative, and value-focused. So what agility did for engineering teams has been focused and expanded into specific areas. DevOps digs a little deeper on your support and platform teams, helping really with kind of CI/CD and really focused on that iterative development in that specific space. Design thinking typically gets associated with UI, UX. But you'll find it's also a great approach to leverage in product development as well. And product first is probably the newest, and at a very high level brings the focus back to what we're building, why we're building it, and really putting that product focus right at the top. So then this is a true or false question. Product and engineering organizations should be isolated from each other to reduce noise and enable teams to thrive independently of each other. So in the past, the answer was true. And very, just want to be very specific that this is in the past. Typically, what would happen is you'd have a direction or an idea set, and then, that would be thrown over a fence basically to your engineering teams, right? In current modern organizations, absolutely, this is false. It's a lot more like back and forth. It's a collaboration, right? Your organizations are focused on building products that add value to customers, and they do so by measuring demand, working with customers, helping build out roadmaps, and this is a collaborative effort. And so what you'll find is, there's always kind of a lagging, when you're talking about organizational structure, things like roles, there's always kind of that lagging aspect behind it where, we're going to work together, but, your structure doesn't enable that, right? And so that ultimately leads to, what you're seeing today. We've all heard of, the apples and oranges comparison, but really, are they all that different? They're both fruit, edible, grow on trees, but they're different when you're actually consuming them. And so in the past, you would have that direction set by product if it existed, or by leadership. It would be thrown over a fence to engineering, and you might have asked for an orange and you got an apple, right? And so this is why you're seeing those emerging trends of that collaborative effort between product and engineering to really help build what you're setting out to build. So let's look at a few ways that organizations structure themselves, and the landscape, and how backlog, refinement, and dependency management play a role. But right before that, I'm just going to ask the question: what does this all have to do with dependency management and backlog refinement? Right, we'll get there. It's just important to understand the landscape, right? And once you've got the landscape, you can really help figure out the solution. So here's a couple of ways that organizations tend to structure themselves. You've got your kind of first product-centric organizations. And a product-centric organization revolves around that product, building and delivering the best version of it. That comes with a cost, right? The inverse is that you're going to pay the price in terms of, is it the most efficient solution that's built? Products leading the charge. So it's not going to be built in the most efficient manner, in the least expensive manner, but it's going to be a solution that pretty much matches what product looked for one for one. Code-centric's kind of the opposite. It's that engineering-led organization. It's going to be built in that efficient manner, but it's going to come at a cost and compromise to product, right? Engineers are looking for the fastest, easiest, least expensive way to build something. And then, just another curveball is that customer-centric organization where you're building things specific to a customer. And this comes at a cost to both, right? It comes at a cost to both product and engineering organizations. Your product's focused on the needs of a specific customer instead of, say, an industry, or if you're looking at a product, you're not looking across the landscape and saying, hey, we built this for a airline customer, but this might help for a railway or a train customer. That's not really much of a stretch, but I think you get the idea. When you're building specifically for a customer, it's going to come at a cost both to your product and your engineering organizations. So let's now take a minute and look at how we might build some tooling to really overcome these challenges that come organizationally or through roles. And so what I've done in this next slide, we'll just use Jira as an example. For those that use Jira, these items on the left should not be a surprise. Themes and initiatives tend to be on the newer side. Not everyone has those implemented, but everything below that should be something that you may have seen. And if you're in version 1 or Rally or another solution, they're all kind of the same, right? But the reality is this is a parent tree here. And so, a bug's always going to kind of go back to a story. It could go to something else. Story is always going to relate to a feature or an epic. And if you have themes and initiatives built, you certainly want to link back to those. But here's kind of where we're going to deviate from this a little bit. Traditionally, all of these items might be in a single project, and that might be the project that your engineering team owns. So that you have one Jira project for project ABC, and everybody's in that one project. And a lot of times there's always that struggle of who's going to write the stories. Nobody ever really wants to write the stories, but that dependency management, that aspect of linking back is always something that tends to get overlooked, right? You might have it in terms of initially a story to an epic. You might build something like that, but inevitably it almost never gets maintained. And this is where I would say things start to break, because when you're looking and working in a single project with all of these items, you will inevitably get the question as to why are you working on X when you should be working on Y? That's the priority. There's always a question about, what is the priority? It's just a huge waste of time. I'm not trying to diminish the meaning, but everyone should always know what the priorities are. And so if we're talking about these types of issue types, for example, if we were to allocate people or organizations to these story types and kind of make them the owners, you can see where you can kind of create a structure that's going to enable, by segmenting, you enable collaboration. I know that sounds backwards, but we'll get into it. So typically, if you're looking at themes, initiatives, epics, and features, at least for me, product has always kind of owned that, right? And then if we go into the next part, engineering kind of would focus on those bottom items. There's always some overlap here, right? And when they're, well, I guess for this particular solution, what I would suggest is basically split this up into two projects. And so this is where we go into the whole segmenting enables collaboration. So we've all worked for organizations where leadership defines priorities for a year. For example, Meta just made this the year of engineering, right? I think last year was the year of the metaverse, right? So these might be your almost your portfolio items, if you want to think about that. Whatever the order is of those priorities, those should be listed in this project. So if the year of efficiency should be number one. Maybe metaverse was number one, it becomes number two. It should be prioritized 1 through N. And what this accomplishes really is you've got the people that are defining priority at the top in their own space. Really just, that's what it is. There's never any question, this is what it is. It matches the rhetoric that you get in your meetings. There should never be any question, what is the priority? The second project that you're going to build is for engineering, for this particular example. And engineering is going to own those epics and features. And that doesn't mean that product can't go in and edit them and work with them. Absolutely. Everybody is going to have access across these two projects. You might just have engineering access with read-only at this level. But product is going to be able to see everything here, and engineering is going to be able to see everything here. And then that linkage, that dependency management that we typically avoid, that we take shortcuts, it's all going to link back. So let's talk a little bit about roles and who's doing what. So I generally just put product managers, product owners here. You could have a portfolio manager, you could have leadership here. again, this is just the space. This is where product as an organization is playing, right? Down through to the story. Now, on the engineering side, same thing. You're going to see that overlap on the story as well. But there's also your engineering leadership right here, right? And so this is where everybody has input into everything. And here's where collaboratively you are working, both organizations are working to help define the roadmap, help define what the teams are going to build, and making sure that alignment to make sure that you're not getting, an apple when you expected an orange, right? But effectively, what you're doing here by splitting out two projects is giving each team their own environment to play in, their own playground, let's call it, and defining at a very high level how you engage within the tooling. Like I said, this is just a simple example with two projects. There could be a third project here. And you can also leverage additional tooling, things like, if you're in the Atlassian space, advanced roadmap, to help visualize and show this in a way that's effective for your teams and for your leadership. You might pull all of this and put those linkages in Excel. That's okay too, except it's a static view. But the reality, what you're trying to accomplish here at the end of the day is you've got 10 stories. I'm sorry, I can't speak. 10 stories that are linked to a specific epic or feature, and maybe that's tied to your number one priority item, right? So what you've accomplished here, when you're working on those 10 stories, no one's going to ask you, why are you working on this? That's not the priority. It's going to link back. It's very clear why you're working on it, right? At the same time, it also creates an effective backlog for you. So an interesting way that you can use this, for example, is you know what your top 5 priorities are. You go down those top 5 priorities. So if you have 3 extra points of capacity in a given sprint, and you need a 3-point story, and it just so happens that the next story that's a 3 is a priority 4, you can bring that in. You can get ahead. And that's certainly something that I've done with my teams. Just really, having that transparency to say, we're working on your top priority. We brought something in from the 4th priority because it fit the capacity. It might have some overlaps with the work that you're doing today. So there's probably some efficiencies to be gained as well. You can be able to intelligently speak to what your teams are doing and why. And more importantly, you can make sure that everybody's aligned, right? Having a structure like this enables that particular tool to become the source of truth across the company. I mentioned you might have a company that has pillars. I use Meta as an example. Well, if the tooling reflects what those pillars are, and if the tooling shows all the work that teams are going to be working on, that tooling effectively becomes your source of truth, not just for your engineering team, not just for your product team, but all your stakeholders as well. And again, this should be fully transparent. Everyone should at least be able to see, but where you see these different teams here, they should be able to work in those different spaces where they need to. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to discussion here. And let's see if there's any questions in the chat. Like I said, it's very high level. This isn't the exact formula that you may follow within your organization, but it may give you some ideas on how you might implement something that enables that collaboration between the two. The important thing is you always want those two teams talking to each other. You want those two teams building with each other. And so where product setting direction in that traditional model and throwing it over the fence, what you want is engineering looking at what was thrown over the fence and saying, throwing it back, right? And saying, hey, you know, this particular thing doesn't make sense. Have you considered this?
Joseph, can I kick off with one question for you?
Absolutely.
You spoke about like segmenting. You said segmenting improves collaboration, or you used a certain word, right? So segmenting teams or segmenting work? It was a little just when you say segmenting.
No, great question. The teams are already segmented, right? You might have a product owner ingrained on a Scrum team, but typically that's kind of like a matrix organization. That product owner belongs to a product organization, right? So the teams are already in a way segmented. What I'm talking about is physically segmenting that work across the in the tooling. Let's put it that way. And what you're doing by that is, you know, by creating as an example, a Jira project just for product, right? That's their space to work together to define vision, right? Mm-hmm. And then creating that specific Jira project for engineering where they're building that work product and everything that comes with it, you know, your user stories, your tasks, your etc. And that's their space. But just because it is, you know, you have your own separate spaces doesn't mean you're not allowed to play in each other's playground. So I just want to call that out.
And so 2 slides before, right, you had like the 3 types of teams, you know, like the code specific teams. If you can go 1 slide earlier, you know.
There you go.
So product centric, code centric, customer centric, right? So that will be in your other slide, the lowest level of teams. So is there a difference of how we would organize the backlog if it is code centric versus product centric, or that doesn't change? Is what I'm hearing you say is that doesn't really change. It is just how you kind of start at the team epic level and do the prioritization.
You might structure your tooling, your teams. Using the word teams is very loosely here, right? But you might structure your projects in the tooling a little differently. But what I was calling out in this slide is, you know, you can structure organizations any number of ways, but ultimately you can overcome the negative aspect, the inverse aspect of that structure. So, for example, I mentioned that a product-centric organization is going to have costs in terms of, you know, engineering efficiencies, right? So you could overcome that cost in your tooling by enabling that collaboration. Same thing in an engineering-centric organization. This is just like an organizational structure type of thing. If your engineering manager is leading everything, they're going to have a different mindset than, say, a product manager leading everything, right? What I'm trying to say here is your focus at the organizational level can be overcome with the tooling. You just have to adjust the tooling in a way that enables the collaboration to overcome the costs or challenges that come with that focus.
I'm just curious, anyone in this group, any particular you see more of, like a product versus code versus customer centric, you know, anyone in the group? I mean, I've seen a lot of, like, in the current thing, I'm doing a lot of code centric teams. So there's a lot of like, they're aligned by the different components, you know. And so what happens is, because like that's the back-end team, that's a front-end team, right? And so there's a ton of dependency management that just comes by nature of how they're designed, you know. So then they end up with all these scrum of scrums and all of that, right? So so in one case, Joseph, there was like, I remember one of my engagements had 5,000 people, you know, and there was like scrum of scrum of scrum of scrum at 27 levels or something, right? So it became kind of
It loses meaning. It loses meaning. And so, this is kind of where I'm saying, if you have a product-centric organization, let's just say you have 4 Scrum teams working on a particular effort, your Scrum of Scrums is going to have those 4 Scrum Masters in there, right? But it's the feedback that you're getting is just individual to that product. Now, to your point, there's layers. So you might have a Scrum of Scrums above that, where the person who's facilitating that Scrum of Scrums at the product level. But we've all played telephone, where person 1 says one thing, and by the time it tells it to person 2, tells it to person 3, and by the time you get to person 10, the message is entirely different than what it was, in that first layer Scrum of Scrums. And so that's where I'm saying, the cost in that Scrum of Scrums is you're so focused on that product and the product-centric organization that you're losing efficiencies on the engineering side. An example of that could be, I work for an organization where if you were starting a new project and you needed hardware, right? It would take, from the time you submitted it to the time you got credentials and that hardware delivered to you, 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're in that product mindset, right. Your engineering teams are working off their local for 6 months, and that's not going to be very efficient. I'm just talking about it from an infrastructure perspective, but in an engineering and a code-centric space, because they own that infrastructure, you might say, hey, I have this project over here that's only using, this is in a bare metal world, by the way, pre-cloud, that's only using 20-30% of the capacity on their server. Here, why don't you take some capacity so you can start working, right? That's just coming at it from an infrastructure perspective. Now, if you're talking about things like any product that you build within an organization, it's going to have, for the most part, the same components. You're going to have things like login, sign in, and I'm simplifying significantly here, right? But there's a lot of overlap in solutioning. A code-centric organization is focused on those efficiencies, and they're going to say, hey, we don't need to integrate single sign-on for the 10th time. We've done this 100 times. Just go to this repo and pull this code, right?
Yeah. Makes sense. Well, so what you're saying, just to close this, right? So you're not saying this is better than that or something. You're just saying overall, depending on whichever version you have, you may have different types of issues. But from a dependency management perspective, it depends on which structure here. You'll end up designing your backlogs and connecting up with teams and epics at a portfolio level. And then a central group drives that. And through that, we are able to deliver kind of the more easier way to flow of work down the system. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly it. And so I worked for another organization where I had 3 Scrum teams with 9 product managers. Those 9 product managers would always fight for overcapacity for the team, saying, well, that's not the priority. This is the priority. And this is one of the things that I did at that organization, split it out, get to a level that's able and willing to make the call on what priorities are. And so the conversation isn't anymore, why are you working on this? What's the priority? It's when can you work on this? Based on the priorities, is there any overlap? From a product perspective, they can look at the priorities and say, hey, there's some overlap here. There might be some efficiencies. Let's have one story cover these 2 priorities, right? You start looking for opportunities because you have to get scrappy, right? When you have a product manager or 9 product managers that no longer own the prioritization, they're going to look for ways to collaborate together to make sure that they're getting what they want and need done, right?
I get it. Makes sense. Thank you. Thanks for answering. Thank you, Joseph. And with that, I'm going to stop recording.